Garmagat Cahirlach, and thank you, Minister, and all of the witnesses for their contributions. And I think we agree in an awful lot of what has been said, and we certainly agree on the value of further education and apprenticeships. But I think we do need to drop the idea that the main issue with it is the perception and snobbery around apprenticeships, because I think that abdicates responsibilities for the impediments that need to be addressed within the apprenticeship and further education process. That might be the case for some people, but it's not for most. We know that the further education system needs multi-year funding to provide the ability to plan strategically, to know where people are and have greater freedom to provide the courses and the education that people in their communities want and need. I do welcome the new CAO website thing to include the FET options, including the apprenticeship. Certainly that will be a step forward. But critical pathways must be there for those who do not want to progress to higher education. And when we look at it, it's quite stark, really. Less than 5% of almost 4,000 students that do the pre-nursing in further education get access to degree courses afterwards. That is a real problem that we need to address. It's simply not good enough, especially when we have the shortages of nurses that we have. Now, Minister, you talk about enhancing the visibility of apprenticeships, and I think that misses the point to an extent. Many people out there right now are trying to get an apprenticeship. I speak to them every day. I know of one person who just got an apprenticeship after trying for 2 years. 140 people interviewed for 2 apprenticeships places in that case. Now, the retrofitting targets that you mentioned mean that we will need 27,000 tradespeople working in this area in the coming years. So we know exactly what we need. We only currently have about 18,000 craft apprenticeships in total, and we've more on the waiting list, unable to access the training that they need. So the process has been allowed to grind to a halt. Now, I know that COVID has been a big factor in that, but there were capacity issues before the pandemic, and I think we need to be a real honest conversation about this as well, and this is the only way we're going to be able to tackle what we need to. The so-called emergency response to the waiting list in 2020 was to allocate 12 million to address the backlog, but this was despite the fact that the backlog was actually saving the state over 16 million in the same year due to not paying many of the allowances. The response has been completely inadequate, I think, and has left the system in crisis. We also need to make sure that apprenticeships are there for people that want them. We should be leveraging the public procurement system by applying apprenticeship employment criteria for companies that want to apply for public contracts. We need to be very direct about this in ensuring that that is part of the conditions. There are many other issues around apprenticeships, but I'm conscious of my time, Minister. So I want to kind of ask you a couple of things. What are the estimated savings created by the waiting list for the state in 2021 as a result of the state paying out less allowances? And I want to just ask, maybe this is a question for Tim. I know you talk about the HEA funds, ICT and entrepreneurship summer camps, and I welcome that. But does this in any way suffice when we have so many second-level schools not teaching computer science? And is it an objective of you, Minister, and the Department and Government to ensure that all students in this day and age have an option to study computer science? I think that absolutely has to be our ambition, and there has to be a timeline on that. In the changing environment that we have, I don't think it's acceptable that we can have schools without that option in terms of computer science. I want to refer to John Connor when you say to establish a systematic student counselling and career guidance. It's shameful that it's not there already. You know, we know from last year, even from research that we did with the college students, that one of the biggest impediments to them making the right choices at further and higher education was that they didn't have any career guidance, or they didn't have sufficient career guidance. So I just want to see how that is going to be fixed. I want to ask Andrew, in terms of solace, we have areas like Ballyhonus in County Mayo where you have an ETB training centre there. The community want to make that into a vibrant training centre for the town that has been decimated with banks leaving it and other things. And yet the community within the town want to have a cohort of well-trained people, and they want not huge funding, but they want some funding and some support in being able to turn the ETB centre into a place where apprenticeships for specific job opportunities within the town can be used. And I think that's a way of us really reviving, making use of buildings that aren't being used, and reviving our towns as well, and building up that labour capital that we need in all of these towns to be able to attract industries into them as well. So I think we need a much broader thinking, but we need to unblock the things that we need to unblock. Finally, I just have to say this in terms of pathways and pathways for nurses. There should be no reason why people can't go on and do an apprenticeship, but know that they can next go on to do a degree, they can next go on, they can go right up to PhD level. And that needs to be made clear to them. And I think on the Good Friday Agreement Committee last week, we talked about cancer research and oncology. And you will know, ministers, there's the most brilliant oncology nurses. Why don't they go on to be consultants? What blockages are there to stop them going on to be consultants? So there are lots of things that we need to address, and I have very little time for answers, but maybe you can answer some of them throughout the...
Give them 2 or 3 minutes, but Minister Harris, and then we'll just ask a quick comment off one or two. Mr. Condon, maybe.
I'm sure that wouldn't be intentional. We've got loads of questions, a very little time to answer them, but I mean, the stuff I want to both agree and disagree with Deputy Conway-Walsh on. I mean, the first one, I suppose, and I don't think you intended like this, but I definitely won't drop the idea, which I think was your phrase, that the issue, or part of the issue around apprenticeships, is definitely not the lack of information or a snobbery or a cultural issue, because I genuinely believe it is. I mean, I remember a meeting, and that's not abdicating responsibility, because I accept it's only a part of it. I met Zoe, the 1,000th female registered apprentice in Ireland. She's an accounting technician in Cork. No one ever told Zoe about apprenticeships, didn't know anything about them. Her brothers in schools became aware of it. She wasn't aware of it. She went to an all-girls school. Zoe said, if I had been made aware of this much earlier, my career pathway would have been easier. I met Jack in Cavan. Jack got his first place in the CAO, went off and started his degree, absolutely hated it. Jack dropped out, and Jack did his pre-law course in Cavan College of Further Education, or Cavan College as it's called. If only I had known about that first, Jack said to me, would have been an awful lot more straightforward. Karen in Sligo College of Further Education, these are real people. Karen was gutted when she didn't get the points she wanted in her CAO. Karen went to Sligo, did a year in Sligo College, and is now going on to do, actually on to St Angela's College to do her degree, and said she feels better developed as a person. So I do genuinely believe, passionately, that the pathways, the information, the knowledge that we're giving our students at that 16, 17-year-old age is key. That is absolutely not in contradiction with the point Deputy Conway-Walsh validly makes about the need for us to up our game as well in terms of what we're doing. Fully accept that. And I mean, there are a couple of things that we are doing. We won't have time to get into all of them. But in terms of increasing the number of available apprentices, which I think availability was a core part of your question, I mean, 2 very key actions taking place next year. The first is from January, for the very first time, a core financial payment to any employer who takes on a new apprentice of around €2,000 per apprentice per year. Hospitality sector, restaurant association looking for this for years. So a financial incentive for an employer to take on an apprentice. And secondly, there's been hypocrisy in the public sector on this. We wag our finger about apprenticeships and give out about it. The entire public sector, which I think employs around 300,000 people, on average takes on 80 apprentices a year. That is a darn disgrace. There's a target in the Apprenticeship Action Plan of 750 a year by 2025. By next July, the quotas of who's doing what across councils, agencies and departments will be brought to Cabinet. On the apprenticeship backlogs, the wait times and your response, Mr Brownlee will comment on that, because I would just say I'm very satisfied with the plan they have in place. I think the only constraint in fairness, has been an ability to increase the capacity in terms of public health. I think we're now in a good place on that. Any funds they've required, any more funds they will require, will be forthcoming on that, because I think clearing that backlog, and I accept it's not all COVID, but it is a chance for a good to come from COVID in terms of removing that backlog once and for all. To agree, on pre-nursing, I think the Deputy is entirely right. And when I talk about, and Mr Brownlee talks about, this new portal on Friday being the first step towards an integrated third level system, one of the very next steps has to be, if you go on to do your pre-nursing or your pre-anything else and you get the very top marks there has to be a linkage. And I fully agree with the Deputy on that, and I'm fully committed to delivering on that as part of our integration of the tertiary education system. But Mr Brownlee might comment on some of the specifics, Chairman, around the wait times and the backlog.
Less than a minute, but if we can, because I'm very conscious that there's other speakers coming as well.
Just to cover the
Just
waiting list.
and just go through,
come back on the other two.
Less than a minute.
Okay, no problem. Well, I suppose on the waiting list, I think we have to be conscious that it's only from September, it's only from last month that ETBs and higher education institutions have been allowed to kind of return to full on-site capacity. There's a major emergency plan, and I totally agree with the Deputy, it is an emergency, and it was, capacity was an issue before all this started, but it is many, many times worse. The emergency plan involves increasing the instructor base significantly, and you'll see there's an ongoing campaign to recruit 100 additional staff into ETBs in the next couple of months. We've moved the entire delivery model for phase 2 of off-the-job training from 3 intakes to 2 intakes a year, so that effectively increases capacity by 50%. There's been 20 million capital investment to expand workshop capacity across both FET and HE. And as I said, the key thing is we're actually back on site. So until September this year, for the 9 of the first 12 months of COVID, the workshops were closed. We couldn't actually run the training. For the period until September, they were operating about 50% capacity. So now they're ramped up, and now we are turning the corner, and already you've seen the level of waiting lists go from, I think, 11,800 at the end of July to 9,779 at the end of September, because we've been able to get people back in training. So we believe the corner has turned, but there's certainly been no letting up, and we do completely accept we're in an emergency situation, Deputy.
Okay, thank you very much.